Okay, we are ready to go. I am so excited to see how many people are in this tabernacle. Socially distancing themselves with the pews, but remember the 6-foot rule, da 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 da. We want to not be a hot spot for COVID. There's sanitizer at all the entrances, so be sure to use the hand sanitizer. We have a very shortened season this year, as I guess you know. We finally were able to get the brochures, so they're at all the entrances and exits as well. We do not have our hymn sings on Wednesdays. We canceled our concert series because of the COVID virus, but we have our speaker series. Yay! So you're here tonight, and then on August 20th, August something. I have a brochure. I can even look it up, but I don't know where it went. But in August, we're celebrating women's suffrage, and there's even going to be a parade, a socially distant parade. What is the date of that? The 24th. And then we had a speaker scheduled for June, but everything got canceled in June. And she has agreed to come in September. So our season is going to go a few weeks longer than usual. And she's going to talk on the women in the Navy. And so it should be a good speaker series, even though we don't have our concert series. We've also had to cancel our corn roast. So if you were planning to come to the corn roast, it's been canceled. So next year is going to look totally different. I don't think there's anything I forgot to mention, and it's hot enough in here. Let's just have Paul Faulkner take over and tell us all about the Western Rail and Railroad and Emory Grove Station.
Let's see if I can do this correctly. We got a clip.
Sounds like thunder.
As long as there's no lightning, we're good. Oh, that sounds. Oh, wow. Sorry. All right, I have a tendency to talk a little loud. All right, my name again is Paul Faulkner. I am the president of the Western Rail and Railway Historical Society up in Union Bridge. Occasionally I'll be turning my head, so you might not get it. I was asked by Dave if I'd be interested in coming down here and talking about the Western Maryland Railway in Emory Grove. Well, not only in Emory Grove, but we're also going to look at parts of Linden. A little background on myself. I'm a retired Baltimore County firefighter. And my wife and I now live up in Eldersburg, and we are both natives of Pikesville, which I got to talk to Mr. Keir here, which was really, really nice. So anyway, anybody else who'd be familiar, been out in this area for at least 35 to 40 years plus. My father-in-law was the one that owned the shoe shop in downtown Reisterstown, right at the corner of 140 and Main Street. So anyway, I'll put my notes. So anyway, pretty much, when my wife and I first got, we first got engaged, we were going to go to, and we looked at an apartment over here on 4610 Prospect Avenue. We really would have liked that, so we could have been Rovers. Well, anyway, so, talking about that. So, most of my time in the fire department I spent in Woodlawn, and then for my last year and a half I was up at Garrison Station, so I was up in this neighborhood quite a bit for my last year and a half. Thank goodness not here. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about the Western Maryland. And if you can see up on the screen, that is the Western Maryland Railway Historical Society Museum. It was given to the Society for $1 back in 1967 by the Western Maryland Railway. But that was just the office on that side. You know what? I forgot my pointer. Darn it. And the building on the right was the office for the Union Bridge area, and that part became the Society's museum in 1967. Later on, when the Maryland Midland decided that they were going to vacate the depot to the left, or the west of that building, is when we bought it, and now we own the whole complex. So, let's see, from there on, we go up to the next one. Uh-oh, let's try that one. That, it don't like me. There we go. I'll just hit the enter button. Okay, in order to get any kind of information or history of when this railroad came up here, we need to talk about a slight going back to when the railroad actually started. Western Maryland Railway was originally chartered as the Baltimore, Carroll, and Frederick Railroad in 1852. And this is 24, 25 years already after the B&O had just made it out to the Ohio River. So the B&O was pretty big goings on. The original plan of the railroad was to build from Baltimore west to Washington County and Encino Canal in Williamsport, Maryland. Because a lot of the freight and goods from the Cumberland Valley up in there was headed east over to Philadelphia and then down, sometimes down the Susquehanna River, long way around the barn. And also for the people in Carroll County, all the goods and services had to go to Sykesville, to the B&O. All right, well, I don't know what that's about, but okay. All right, Sykesville. Anyway, yeah, Eldersburg. So, anyway. So, in 1853, the name was changed to Western Maryland Railroad Company, and that's simply because the Washington County got involved, and they wanted part of the name, and they were going to say, well, the name is too long, so we're just going to make it, hey, Western Maryland. But everything, really, if you think about it, from everything here at one time was considered Western Maryland. So anyway, that is a stock certificate from April 1st, way back, 1861. Hit the enter button. Right here. No light. Well, that's probably the reason why. All right, this is technical, sorry. Pushed the wrong button. Anyway, you can see in Barlow, Carroll, and Frederick, Colonel John Longwell of Westminster, who's pretty much identified as just about everywhere in Carroll County, got a bunch of people together, and these are all pretty prominent Carroll Countians, to help finance and also the politics of getting the railroad coming up through Washington County. If you read a lot of these names, you'll see buildings up in Westminster, street names, although of a lot of these people that were first incorporated in the railroad. Next slide, please. The Baltimore, Carroll, and Frederick, to anyone familiar with the history of Carroll County, and I have to throw that in there because most of the conscriptors for the railroad itself came from Carroll County. So they considered it a Carroll County enterprise. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where this gets interesting, because at one time, they had discussed going a different way, and there were several routes that didn't even come into Glendon and Emory Grove. Dave? Okay, if you can see, there's several routes. What's in the highlighted is the actual route that got built. Okay, if you see now, their number one was a Black Rock Railway, which I wish I had my laser pointer. This one up here. It actually stayed on the northern central line up to Parkton. From Parkton, it went over to Manchester, and then Manchester came down somewhere just east of Westminster. The second route came out of Cockeysville. Now, that does involve Glendon and Emory Grove right there. It does involve that. And there was two routes that I actually surveyed at the time. And the third one was actually the route that they built. So, anyway, some other competing railroads, for some reason they put them in there. Don't know why. Anyway, next slide, please. Okay, the route cost of construction to Westminster in 1853. The Deer Park route. And here is what's so fun about the Deer Park route. The Deer Park route was originally going to go from Owens Mills. Now, we have to use Owens Mills because Owens Mills, I'll get back up a little bit. The Baltimore and Susquehanna Railroad, which started in 1820, or in the 1830s. It actually started, they wanted to go from Baltimore to York, Pennsylvania. York, Pennsylvania got word of it and said, no way, you're not coming in here. All right. So they decided, the Baltimore and Susquehanna says, all right, well, we're just going to go west a little bit, go north, circumvent the town they work, and come in just north of it. So they built from what they call Relay House, or basically down by Lake Roland, up to Owens Mills. Well, then for some reason, the city of York had a change of heart. Oh, yeah, come on. So now they're going to go ahead and they're going to follow the Gunpowder Falls all the way up into Pennsylvania. Well, that little spur got left over, and that's what the Western Maryland started on. The Western Maryland actually started, and from the time that you're looking at 1852, and construction didn't start until 1859, they were running little horse and buggy carts and little rickety old steam engines between what they call Green Spring Junction and Owens Mills. So anyway, when they did the route, they started looking around for things, and the only thing that we can find out with the Deer Park route is it started in Owens Mills, and we think somewhere around Timber Grove Road. It split off, and it became what's called the, see if I can see it on. Anyway, it's, all right, let's see, Deer Park Road, it was going to go across Nicodemus Road. So basically, if you look at the topography of a lot of the area, that section of Nicodemus Road out towards Carroll County is really kind of on top of the hill. Well, then they came in and found out that they had to build a bridge across the North Branch of the Tabasco River, 95 feet high by 450 feet long. It was going to go over into Carroll County, make a sharp right-hand turn, cross over to Deer Park Road, and go over what they call the Beaver Run, which is, you go out 91, get down the bottom of the hill where Cold Saturday Road is. That's where they were going to go across. Well, you see the price tag. And, well, today's standards, I mean, most things just spend that in a day. But, you know, back then, that was a large chunk of money. Well, then they did the Worthington Valley Route, and we already talked about that, but it came out of Cockeysville, and probably right around the streams in the area that run along Shawan Road, run along Tufton Road, into, now, where it came up out of the valley to get up here, we don't know, because it doesn't exactly explain it on that. And we don't know if it was going to join up with the Owens Mills route or whether it was going to go to the Deer Park route. But either which way, it wasn't coming through here. Okay, the chosen route to Williamsport, Maryland. Now, if you notice, I have a little, kind of a dog leg down here because that's the Northern Central's Green Spring branch. It came in Owens Mills, and obviously going west. Go ahead. Next one, please. Okay, Relay House, Hollins, to Westminster. It cost $321,000 to do. Now that's compared to $700 and some thousand and $400 and some thousand that they had done the other routes. But the problem with this route is, and it always ran into, and it always was a big boogaboo for the railroad, is they were always dependent from day one on the Northern Central. And the Northern Central was, for some reason, very tolerant of the Western Maryland. They didn't really see them as, competition, because they were headed west and Northern Central was headed north. So, next slide, please, Dave. The Western Maryland also used the Calvert Street Station of the Northern Central, which is pretty much gone now, before they built their own depot downtown. Okay, and you can see that this is 1876. And you see here, Lake Roland, they had, Western Maryland had a turntable there, plus that's that building over there in 1880. Now in 1880, this had all reverted back to the Northern Central, and you'll see why in a little while. But you can see in the background where you can see Lake Roland. There is still track down there. Actually, there was a streetcar museum that was going to build down there, and they never did. Well, they did for a little while, and then they moved down to, I think it's Washington. Anyway, if you go down there now, you can see these granite steps. If you stand on the top of the hill and look down over, and that's the light rail line now, looking down over there, you can still see those granite steps. Next slide, please, Dave. Okay, to build the railroad, they needed something to haul all their equipment around, stuff like that. So that was really the first it was the first locomotive on the Western Maryland, but never really belonged to them. It was never used in service, but it was called the Canary because the people up in Union Bridge and New Windsor area kept seeing this thing fluttering around like, and they called it, fluttering around like a canary. So that's what they call it. It was never used in revenue service. By the time they got their larger locomotives, this thing just kind of fell off in the distance. Dave, next slide, please. Okay, this is engine number 2 to Western Maryland. There's an engine number 1, and it is called the Green Springer. I have no photographs on that, and I don't know why. Next one, Dave, please. The Monocacy, and this is number 5. So, where's 3 and 4? If somebody knows what they are, I'd like to have them. Anyway, from here, the Western Maryland was completed to Westminster in 1861. So if they started Owens Mills in 59, got to Westminster by 61. So somewhere in here, in either 1860, 1859, 1860 is about when it came through here. It got to Union Bridge in 62, but was stalled because of the Civil War. Now, if you were living here in this area at the time during the Civil War, there were as many as 20 to 30 trains at a time on the line between Baltimore and Westminster. They were supplying, the Union forces were sending supplies out and bringing their wounded back in Baltimore and wherever hospital houses and prisoners and things like that. Okay, the line was completed to Hagerstown in 1872, and by 1873 they were already out to Williamsport, which was their final destination, and they were there to get coal off the C&O Canal that was always destined to Washington, D.C., and then put on the B&O and brought here, and of course that jacked the price up. So now, the Western Maryland's picking up its own coal, bringing it in. Okay, at the bottom paragraph, it said the Western Maryland then built its own line from Owens Mills to Fulton Junction in 1873. And then obtained trackage rights on the Pennsylvania Railroad to Union Station, later called Penn Station, and it's still there, through the B&P Tunnel. Now, B&P means Baltimore and Philadelphia. It was actually a separate railroad that went from Baltimore to, before it was all gathered up by the Pennsylvania. Now, part of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, under the city, the Western Maryland then built the spur to its own depot. Dave, Hill Depot, downtown Baltimore. What's there now is the, actually it was at the intersection of Hill and High Street. And right now there's a freight house down there, and I believe it's this large building back there that is a 5-story public storage today. But most of this is all open parking lot now. Next slide, please. Okay. Anybody recognize that building? Would hope so. Yeah, that's Rachelstown Road. It was originally built as Painter's Store in 1870. The building was sold to the Western Maryland Railway and used as a depot until 1907, when the main line was relocated a little bit more to the west and elevated. That's where the bridge is down there. To the rear of the structure with, okay, that's, the track, this track here that you're looking at was actually the original main line of the Baltimore and Susquehanna. So that track laying in center of Racetown Road, I don't know if they pulled it up yet or not, I won't go down there much anymore, that was the original line. You followed the track back, to where Master Lumber Company was, the lumber company that ended up getting flooded out and wiped out the bridge in Agnes. They actually had a roundhouse back in there and a turntable where they would turn their equipment and bring it back out. That became Baltimore County Supply, hardware store. I was at 2 structure fires in that. One of my time doing Pikes for Volunteers, when I was at Pikes for Volunteers, another time doing the career service. I played around up on the roof up there. So anyway, that's the story of that. Okay. Hey. All right, Fulton Junction. Yeah, that's really kind of ugly. Okay. All in itself, the Western Maryland really wasn't its passenger service was really more or less like second class. Their idea is freight. Every railroad in the world was built for freight. So this, actually at Fulton Junction, was the end of the line on that part. And it, unfortunately, is not there anymore. Okay. This road in the background, I looked that up today, but I'll be darned if I see it on my notes.
Fulton Street.
I don't know if it, I don't think it was Fulton Street.
Monroe Street.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes it was, out from Monroe Street. I don't know why I didn't write that down. Anyway, all right, next slide, please. This gentleman here, very, very important gentleman to the railroad. As John Mifflin Hood, in his office at Hillman Station, Mr. Hood was president of Western Maryland from 1974 to 1902. Extremely unusual for any kind of railroad president to do much more than 10 years. If you look, and he is like, and this is 1874, the railroad started in 1852, and he's the 14th president already. Well, he took the bull by the horns and did a whole lot for this railroad. Dave, next slide.
The statute still stands.
Yeah, that's because they don't know his history. Anyway, and I'm not saying I'm glad, I'm tickled to death, but they don't know his history. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, John Mifflin Hood, in 1886, Hood acquired control of the Baltimore-Harrisburg Railway Company. Extremely important to this area here, which is technically a paper railroad. What they mean by paper railroad, they didn't have any rolling stock, they didn't have any locomotives, they just provide the money to build it and somebody else operates it. And it gave Western Maryland a northerly route into south central Pennsylvania. The Baltimore and Harrisburg, or the Dutch line as it's referred to, goes up into Pennsylvania, extends from Emory Grove through Hanover and Gettysburg to Highfield, Maryland. Next slide, please. Okay. The Baltimore and Harrisburg Railway. This is one of the their share certificates for it. 59-mile main line from Emory Grove to Worthana, Pennsylvania, with a 6-mile branch from Valley Junction, Pennsylvania to Hanover Junction, Pennsylvania on the northern central. That's essential too, and I'll tell you why in a little while. After the Western Maryland Railway gained control in 86, the main line was extended 15 miles from Worthana, Pennsylvania to the top of the mountain, Highfield, and joined up with their own main line. So basically what the Western Maryland did is they got to Emory Grove, they went west, they went north, and then they rejoined again on the mountain on the west side of Thurmont. Okay, in 1893, Western Maryland built a branch from Porter's Junction to the city of York, Pennsylvania. That is still in business, that York branch. Good thing. All right, railroads of Baltimore and Harrisburg. Hanover Branch, Hanover and Gettysburg Railroad. It's a merger of the Hanover Branch Railroad and the Susquehanna, Gettysburg, and Potomac. Somebody had grandiose ideas. And from what I've been able to find out, they were planning on building from York, along the Susquehanna River, coming down through Gettysburg, and then joining up into Emmitsburg, coming down the Emmitsburg Railway into Thurmont, and then Thurmont down into Washington. There was also another company that did the same thing, and it was the Washington, Frederick, and Gettysburg Railroad. Frederick County built the line. They were real excited about it, so they built from Frederick to Thurmont. And then the other two, the ones in Washington and the ones coming out of Gettysburg, well, they chickened out. So those railroads were never built. The Bachman Valley Railroad. One that I learned about when I first joined here, because I knew there was something up there, but I didn't know exactly what it was. Bachman Valley Railroad, Black Rock, or Ebbville, Maryland, to Valley Junction to connect with the Hanover Branch, Hanover, Gettysburg. They were mining ore in Ebbville and were shipping out hundreds of tons per year. So it was rather a bit of a vital railroad. The Baltimore and Hanover, again a paper railroad, began operations in 1879, was operated from the Hanover Junction, Hanover Gettysburg River, Emory Grove to the Pennsylvania line, because it was only incorporated at the time in the state of Maryland. All this was purchased by the Western Maryland in 1917, even though the Western Maryland had actually been running it for quite some time. Next slide, please. All right, and this the Dutch line, basically Emory Grove North, York Branch, and on up. For some reason, I didn't highlight it up to Highfield. So that basically gives kind of everything from Baltimore to here, and from there we should be able to get more in towards what was going on around here. Go ahead and next slide, please. All righty. Emory Grove, showing the Emory Grove Depot and Shelter. Now, when I talk about the railroad, it's basically going to be east and west. Western Maryland has nothing to do with the geological north, south, east, or west. The Western Maryland is considered an east-west railroad. So, eastbound's to Baltimore, westbound's Hagerstown, Cumberland, you name it, boom, gone. So anyway, this being here, and unfortunately I don't have a date on this map, or on this drawing, but you can see this shelter here was actually the one that was built for the Emory Grove campground. The depot sat here where the two railroads split. We believe that the depot was built by the Hanover Branch, Hanover, and Gettysburg. Next slide, please. Again. And now your name's actually on it. Unfortunately, it's upside down, so I really couldn't figure out any which way to twist it around and make it look any better, and simply because I wanted the date up here of May 12, 1880 by the engineering superintendent of the Western Maryland. And you can see station here, doesn't show the platform now. Baltimore and Hanover Railroad. The turntable, they had an engine house there. But what gets me is the boundaries that they're surveying. Chestnut tree, leaning chestnut, something else. I just kind of wonder if they're all still there. So anyway, next slide, please.
Okay, Paul?
Yes.
Just for a point of reference, if the trees immediately behind this building were all cut down instantaneously, this is the track plan you would be seeing. This tabernacle, the building you're in, sits here. So all the trackage we're looking at is several hundred yards immediately behind this building.
Right, and we'll see that in a later slide. Next week, Junction of the Western Maryland and Hanover Junction, Hanover and Gettysburg made Emory Grove very vital to Western Maryland's operation, gaining access to south central Pennsylvania, but also bringing goods into Baltimore from the west. Next slide, please. Oh, back up a bit, Dave. Back up.
I want to back up.
No.
Backspace.
Backspace.
Sorry, folks.
That's okay. There we go. All right. Remember this photograph. This is a Hanover Junction, Hanover and Gettysburg locomotive. It is actually headed eastbound, and it's sitting on the Western Maryland. It's not on Hanover Junctions.
Can I ask a stupid question? A couple slides back, you had a depot, an Emory Grove depot, and a shelter.
That's correct.
What do you mean by shelter versus depot?
You'll see that.
Oh,
Coming up. Dave? All right, go ahead next one. All right. All right. That's your depot. The big building. Okay? This is an extremely unusual locomotive. The Western Maryland only had one, and this was it. And it came from the Hanover Junction Railroad. When it was on the Hanover branch, it was number 11, then they changed to 37, and came to the Western Maryland number 50, and it was scrapped in 1925. All right, now, again, this is Emory Grove Depot. In some of the other slides, you'll see the water tower. Next slide, please. All righty, here's what we're talking about. This is the number 3 to Heidelberg. It's circa 1886. It's built in 1857 for the Hanover branch. Here is your shelter. I tried cropping all that, tried blowing it up to get an actual image of it, but it was just beyond a blurred mess. That's the only photograph we have of it. The only one. Now here's the other thing. Who built it? We don't know if the railroad built it. We don't know if the Hanover Junction built it. We don't know if you guys did.
Emory Grove didn't start until 1868.
Well, this is 57. This photograph here.
Right, so we weren't here yet.
Oh, you weren't there.
1868.
Oh, circa, wait a minute. I see it. Oh, no, wait a minute. Hold on.
Okay.
86. My apologies. I looked at the railroad. I looked at the locomotive build date. Okay, so that was there. But see, the thing is, the reason why I'm asking that is because there was another church group that was between Porter's and Hanover, Pennsylvania, that wanted the shelter done too. And the Western Maryland provided all the lumber and all the materials to build this, and they said, here you go. This is how far it needs to be from the track. So, did your community build that? Was it something that was built on the railroad? Which makes better sense to me that your community did, because there's a depot right behind it. If you look at this photograph, you have the shelter here, but just behind here is the Emory Grove Depot. Somebody had some pull. Next slide, please. All right. Hanover Junction and Hanover Gettysburg stations in 1886. Emory Grove is listed right here at the top, so you remember where arrows are. At that time, it had a freight and ticket agent, and it was also a telegraph station. So, that was a big deal. But here, again, Glendon's not listed because Glendon wasn't on that section of the line on the Hanover Junction. Next slide, please. Okay, special passenger trains. I asked about that, and I said, would there be any special passenger trains that would have been chartered just for the Emory Grove Association? No, there would not. And if there was, it was probably listed as an extra, what they call an extra. What an extra is basically not on the schedule, but they put it together, not on their daily schedule. So from here, Emory Grove westbound, there we are looking up. Oh, no, here we go, Emory Grove. It rides in Emory Grove at 9:33 and leaves at 9:35. You had 2 minutes to get on and off that thing. Okay, and then it went down to, that's Woodenboro, but here's Glendon. But Emory Grove has an arrive and a leave time where none of these other stations do, except where the train originates. So, somewhere on that day, July 26th, people were getting off that train to here. Now, coming back eastbound, here we go, same thing. A lot of these, you get up in the Carroll County, Hampstead, Greenmount, Maple Grove, Arcadia, and all those, and then you get the Emory Grove arrives at 2:08 and leaves at 2:10. You people needed to be fast, because the railroads didn't like to be behind them. And again, back then when you had no communications, the only thing that you ran on was what they called timetable or train order. And that was a written thing saying, okay, I have to be in this siding or at this station by this time. No radio communication, nothing. It's all done by that. A lot of accidents on railroads are attributed to those facts. Once radios started to come in, block signaling, a whole lot of other stuff, which Dave could probably tell you more about that than I could, that you'll see a significant drop in railroad accidents. So, next slide, please, Dave. Okay, the Fuller Syndicate, here we go. Okay. May 7th, 1982, the city of Baltimore, who had invested heavily into Western Maryland from its inception up until 1902, sold its interests in Western Maryland to the Fuller Syndicate, which closely related to railroad tycoon.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
I didn't hear it. Oh, anyway. To J. and George Gould. The Goulds had bought a lot of railroads in the West, and they were marching east. Okay, the Western Maryland was to be the eastern terminus and final part of the Gould's plan for a transcontinental railroad, combining all their railroad holdings. The city was so grateful to Mr. Hood for arranging the sale, they erected a statue to him and gave him the honorary title of colonel. Okay? And the reason why that's kind of significant is I've heard him called general. But the truth of the story is, and actually one of our posters at the museum has it up there as General John Mifflin Hood, which is not true. There was a General John Hood, but that was John Bell Hood of the Southern Army. John Mifflin joined the Confederacy as and that's why, good thing to have found that out. He joined the Confederacy as a private. Even though he had major railroad experience in South and Central America, he was down there doing engineering work for these railroads that they were building down south. Came back, fought the Civil War, got severely injured, came back to Baltimore, and then his left arm was goofed up. So when he got that fixed, he got a bunch of guys and went back across the line. They found out who he was, found out what he did. They promoted him to a first lieutenant, and he was in charge of the Confederate railroads for a little while. It was towards the end of the war, so it didn't last long. So anyway, it's a good thing that, people downtown don't know about his history. So we'll leave it at that. Anyway, sales and proceeds from the Western Maryland helped the city rebuild in 1904 after the Great Baltimore Fire. Hey, it's like it's sad, isn't it? It's just plain flat out sad. So anyway, after all this mess, and they've done everything, the Goulds came in and they built the Cumberland Extension from Big Pool, Maryland, which is basically a little bit west of Williamsport, Maryland, to Cumberland. Then they built from Fulton Junction down to Port Covington, and he built Port Covington. That was the Western Maryland's deep water port. Still there. The guy that owns Under Armour wants to rebuild the whole place down there, but that was the Western Maryland's deep water port. So anyway, after the collapse of the Gould Empire, the Western Maryland merged in 1909 as the Western Maryland Railway Company and continued to expand on its own. And what it did, it started to buy up smaller railroads, and it expanded from Cumberland to Connellsville, Pennsylvania. 86 miles, something. So, anyway, next slide. Okay, freight station list. We're going to be back in Emory Grove again. Okay, as of March 6, 1918, Emory Grove was listed as a station, but with no agent, and it received no freight. So now it's starting to downsize. This is about the time after the first Glendon Depot was built. So we're figuring that they're starting to shift everything to Glendon. Emory Grove in itself really, in West Maryland times, really became more of a junction than, passenger stations and drop-off. So, and it's no longer listed on the Baltimore and Harrisburg, but is now listed on the Western Maryland's main line. So, Dave? Okay. In 1921, Emory Grove is totally removed from the passenger and freight timetable. So, by then, they dropped you off in Glendon and you had to get down your otherwise. I'm assuming. Next slide, please, Dave. All right. Emory Grove, 3 years from 1914 to 1990. Alrighty. West end of Emory Grove, right 6/16. It was a head-on collision. I have not been able to find any other information on it. I have searched the Department of Transportation's ICC records, which at the time the ICC was in business and doing investigations, stuff like that. Nothing about it. Nothing. It's unreal.
That's not a tax code accident.
I don't know if it is or not. I mean, it makes sense to me because of the topography you're looking at. It makes sense to me that it's down there farther. But I've got it in my Emory Grove file. So if you guys know more about it than I did, I appreciate it. Because I haven't been able to find it. Even then, I've searched all the years from 1914 to like the 1930s, 40s. Nothing. I don't even see it in West Maryland's records. It's like, oh, you know what? That didn't happen. You didn't see these photos. Next photo, next slide, please. Okay. This might start to get a little more familiar. Okay, we're just going to go through here. This is the buildings that were here in Emory Grove. And like I said, you got to remember that Emory Grove was a very important junction of the two railroad, of the railroad itself. These photographs from 1917 and 1918, these are evaluation photos. They were taken during World War II. The federal government had come along to the railroads and said, you know what? We need you to go out and take pictures and record everything that you have in your physical plant, period. Because there were rumors at the time that the Germans were sending spies over and they were going to wreck the railroads, shut the commerce down. So with the evaluation photos, they took everything in the way of track, bridges, buildings, the whole 9 yards. And if anything was destroyed and it was deemed to be a sabotage, the federal government would have reimbursed the railroads. So anything that you see has got this white writing on it. It's from the 1917, 1918 era. Okay? Freight sheds. And that's all it is. They just took the wheels off the bottom of the boxcar and plopped them on the ground. Here's your freight shed. Emory Grove water tank. Now, what we're seeing here in the water tank was actually in the Y between the Baltimore and Harrisburg and the Western Maryland. We'll see that later on. Okay? Tool house, pump house. This pump house we'll see in another photograph, but the same thing. This is actually a steam-powered pump that they use to draw water, draw groundwater, and to fill that previous water tank. It sat again in the Y between the two railroads. Okay, next slide, please. And there it is. This railroad at the time had a turntable. It was too small. Okay? They had a turntable here, and they also had an engine house. But this turntable, again, sitting in the Y, this is your pump house. And back here in the background, you can see Western Maryland coming in from the west, and the Baltimore and Harrisburg coming in from the north. Emory Grove is just about right there. Next slide, please, Dave. I'd love to go out in the middle of that Y, being it's all railroad property, and see what's poking around in the weeds.
I've never found it.
Never found it? That's
I've
good.
never found any vestige of that turntable.
Is that right? Wow, that's a shame. They did a good job of filling it in. Okay. This is just kind of funny. A lot of times what they would do if a crew would run out of hours, because they were, and I don't know exactly what the hours were in steam days, but back then they were like 14 hours on duty, and then they had to be off duty for 8 hours before they could go back on duty again. And several areas would have places for the crews to bunk and do their 8 hours off duty before they go back. And it's just kind of funny because it says Emory Grove used as a restroom. That's one darn big restroom. Those guys must really have. Anyway, so it is actually, and that's why I put it in parentheses, house. Because everywhere else, all the other photographs I've looked at, it's called a rest house. And that's if they didn't have a caboose that was available. Because a lot of times in the big yards, Cumberland, Hagerstown, Baltimore, they would just camp out in the cabooses. Next slide, please. Okay, 1943. Dave, that's not you, is it? Okay, I'm sorry, I had to throw it at dig it. But anyway, this was the original Emory Grove Telegraph Office. When it was built, I'm not 100% sure. But, and this isn't even it's not an evaluation photo, so it's obviously 1943. Now here's another thing that was pretty interesting. And I lost my, did I lose it? Ah, here. Okay. This is a Y. This Y here is what they use to turn the locomotives. Basically, the locomotive put back into here, and then they switch the switch and come back out, and he's headed back in the opposite direction. Everything coming out of Baltimore City is pure 100% uphill. So the larger the trains they had, the more locomotives they had to have both on the front end and the back end. Well, then they would get up here, which technically here, Emory Grove is the summit of this section of the railroad. So what they would do is they would break that helper off, he'd back into the Y, go back to Baltimore. He'd get clearance, and time is double tracked, so it really wasn't that much of an issue. If the trains were heavy enough, they'd chase them all the way to Hagerstown. Because once you get down through Carroll County, you get over to cross over to Frederick County, and you're climbing a big old mountain again. So, anyway, now, the neat thing about that Y, if there's anybody here that lives on Glendon Meadows Road, here, nope, nobody, okay. Glendon Meadows, house number 209, 215, 217, are right at the end of the Y, about where that locomotive sits. So those houses are pretty much like right here. But all that area behind there and the railroad itself is probably still CSX property. Next slide, please, Dave. Just threw some steam locomotives in here, 1948, and I'm doing it in kind of chronological order, so we'll get up to about the 1990s. Next slide. And what they meant by Russian decapods, when those things were built, they were built for the Russian government, just at the time of the Russian Revolution. So they canceled the orders and ended up selling these off to the other railroads. So that's why they're called a Russian decapod. And the decapod is basically, it's got 5 axles on it, 10 driving wheels. Dave, next slide, please. All right, this was a good one. All right. This is Shay number 6, Western Maryland. She was the last Shay ever built by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio in 1945. It was bought by the Western Maryland Working Mines of Vindex, Maryland, 9% grades. There was grades that locomotive was climbing, it was like that. But she only worked there for 5 years and they closed it. They closed the mines. She sat in Maryland Junction, which is basically just south of Cumberland, and that's where their big West Maryland's big shops were up there. She sat there for 3 years, and then it was given to the Baltimore and Ohio Museum in Baltimore, and she sat there for 27 years. The Cass Scenic Railroad made a deal, and in 1980, she's alive and working out in Cass, West Virginia, pulling trains up and down the mountain. You've never been there, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful ride, and it may not be as hot. So that locomotive is actually working on a tourist railroad longer than she was actually in service on the West Maryland itself. To bring it into Baltimore, they refurbished it at Hagerstown, and then under its own power, came to Baltimore and came through Emory Grove. And her and there's one other steam locomotive that's not running and sitting in Hagerstown Public Park, the 202, which was a Pacific locomotive. And she's sitting there rusting away, but we've heard some good rumors recently, so we don't know what's going on. But those are the only 2 Western Maryland locomotives, steamers, that have survived. Next slide.
Hold on. Can you explain the drive wheels to the public?
Sure, absolutely. Okay. What made these locomotives kind of unique is their ability to climb steep grades and go over rough, uneven terrains, getting into mines, but basically they were made for the lumber industry. The lumber industry, when they put railroads into the woods to bring their lumber out, they didn't care what it looked like. There were some tracks, you know, it'd just be going like this, or uphills, downhills, you name it. These things are technically a tank on rails. And what that basically means, what that means is every one of these driving wheels, there's, I forgot what it is, but there's a driving wheel here, driving wheel here, driving wheels here. And these axles are powered, the pistons are vertical. So they're actually powered on a crankshaft, and that crankshaft goes out to gears right here in the end of these wheels. And these things would climb all over the place. So basically, a tank on the rails. You're just using it whenever you want. Okay, next slide, Dave. All right, downsizing Emory Grove from steam to the diesel era. Dave, do you remember that penstock? Probably not. Oh, they took down 1950. Same year. So, yeah, I wasn't even thought of it. But anyway, okay, they started, when steam came into being, when they were bringing in the diesels, one of the reasons why steam went about its way, steam was very, very labor intensive. They needed a lot of care, lubricating, you name it. Every stop, if you get a locomotive that would leave Baltimore and get to Hagerstown, it had to be fully serviced again. Plus, along the way, it probably had to get coal, probably had to get water. Where a diesel would stick fuel in it and fire it up and drive it away. So, when the diesel era started coming in, Western Maryland had a lot of their physical plant that was specifically for the servicing of steam locomotives, this being one of them. There's only 2 of these type on the entire Western Maryland system, and the other one was right next to the station that's up in Cumberland right now on the Western Maryland Sea. They have one there too, but Western Maryland took it out. This was a full-size tank, and they're dismantling it right now. So over here, and again, I couldn't blow it up without distorting the whole photograph, but right here you can see the very stub end of the Y where they turn the locomotives around. They don't need it anymore, so they disconnect it. Dave, next slide. That one looks familiar to you. All right. All right. Familiar to all of us, actually. Okay, train order office. This was September of 1959 when this was taken. Erected sometime in the late 40s, early 50s, and decommissioned by CSX circa 1984. And thank you, Dave, for that information. I got that yesterday, last night, today. So anyway, all right. Now talking about train order offices. For years and years and years, ever since the railroad started to come to being, they had to get their orders up to a locomotive. So they did what they called a train order stand. And basically, what this well, this is the fireman on the engineer on the engine at Emory Grove. He's reaching out and he's grabbing a loop of string. We got a bunch of these up at the museum if you want to come up and look at it. But tied on the end of that string was his paper orders. So he would pull that in, take it off the string. Okay, this is what we're supposed to do at our next stop. But what gets me with that, they're still doing train order. Did they still do train paper orders when you were hanging out?
Absolutely.
That's what I thought. Okay. You look on the side of the locomotive, there's this little thing here. It looks like a lightning bolt, and it's exactly what it is. On the side of that locomotive, it says radio equipped. So this is kind of a redundancy, I would say. And of course, when the radios come out, maybe they weren't reliable, or yada, 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 whatever. But they're still passing out paper orders. And again, by timetable and train order, a whole lot of wrecks because of that. Because things would get confused. Up here in Finksburg was the most tragic passenger train wreck they had on the Western Maryland, and it was because the crew decided to disregard their orders. The other one up in Thurmont, on the bridge, called the High Bridge. It was the BMX wreck. There was a confusion between the dispatcher and the telegraph offices because one train was late, the other train was late, and they just didn't coordinate it correctly. They ran into each other in the middle of the bridge. So, that's the disadvantage of this. And Western Maryland for years, if you look at the ICC reports, was chastised quite a bit by the ICC for not having block signals and things like that. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay, 1960s. That's westbound, that's an eastbound. Now, that's got 8 locomotives on the front of it, that picture on the right. So that means that must have been a really big train. We're still down, probably down the bottom of the hill at no, well,
Cedar.
no.
Oh.
There you go, thank you. False. So it's probably still down the hill. Anyway, next slide, please. Chassis system is 75. And 1990, the shed was still, the train order office was still there. It looks like there's an operator's car parked in front of it, but it's not boarded up. So, go figure. Okay, moving on. All right, we're going to be a little out of the neighborhood here, head a little east. All right, next slide. Original depot. Built in 1895, it had granite walls and a tile roof. It was destroyed by fire in December 24th, 1903. Pikesville Volunteer Fire Company, my company I belong to, keeps asking me to try to find the paperwork from when they sent their fire engine up from Pikesville on to Western Maryland to help fight this fire. I haven't been able to find it yet. This is an ornate station. There wasn't many of them. You had one that was out in Kemar that looked like that, and one in Pikesville, I think Roslyn looked like that. But anyway, again, they put some money into these places. And this was during President Hood's term. So the railroad was doing all right. And I would think that they probably, again, somebody up here probably had pretty good connections. Or they saw that this community here was going to be fantastic business for the railroad. Next slide. All right, there's the modern one. 1904. This photo is from 1917 on the evaluation. I love looking at these photos where you look at, you get the horse-drawn carriages in the back, and some of the stores down the right-hand side. Now, I'm under the assumption that before the large depot was built, that the tickets and freight office and everything was out of one of the stores down along back on the street on, I guess, Railroad Avenue would be now. Okay, next slide, please. All right. United Railway Electric and Trolley Company bought it up. You guys had trolley up there. It came into Emory Grove, didn't it?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay. Now, the reason why I have Butler Road there and Dover Road next to it, I saw some of the charts, and it had Dover Road. Well, when I started looking at the charts, you could see that the bridge didn't always go over the railroad tracks. It was actually what's called an at-grade crossing. So it actually went across the railroad track, didn't go above it. Next slide. 1943. It's got an electric wire running to it now, so we have electricity. And then eastbound, this is an eastbound 204 heading into Baltimore. Next slide. This is an unusual long train. The only thing I figured this might have been an excursion trip of some sort. Some group chartered the Western Maryland trains to go west. Funny, and one of the reasons why I put this in here is because remember we saw the photo of the water tower being dismantled? There it is right back there. And it's just on the other side of the bridge. And it's definitely after steam era because the train is being pulled by diesel. Even though it's smoking like anything, but that was an outcome. Next slide. I just like this slide. And the reason why I did, because it kind of shows everything in operation. Okay, this is a freight train because they've never used those locomotives in passenger service. You have the operator here standing outside of the office, and what his job was to watch the train go by to make sure it didn't have any defects. If it did, he'd probably have to run in and telegraph Emory Grove to get them to stop before they got out on the main line. But here was something, for all the years that I've come up here and never really looked. The back roof on the back of the depot. For some reason, I thought it was gone. I came up here today, looked around the corner. Hey, the roof's still there. Okay. So, anyway, next slide, please. 1955, again, same thing. And this was an early morning train to Hagerstown. There was several, during the past years, there were several daily trains. One of them was the Union Bridge Accommodation. Went to Union Bridge, turned around and come back. Another one went to Hagerstown, turned around and come back. Then another one went all the way to Cumberland, turned around and come back. So those were the regularly scheduled trains. They were not the extras. And those trains, if you look at a Western Maryland timetable, are listed as 2-digit numbers. Every timetable you look at in Western Maryland, especially for passenger trains, if it's an odd number, it's headed west out of Baltimore. If it's an even number, it's coming back east towards Baltimore. Next slide, please. Nice snowstorm. Okay, depot closed in 1966. When did the post office take it over? So I can't imagine, and you can see the electric wire's gone now. It wasn't the other one. The wire came down here and it's all gone. So I don't know how long it sat vacant before the Postal Service moved in. I'm so glad they did. I mean, you have a rarity. That depot from Baltimore to Glendon, there's none. All gone. From Glendon into, you start up on the Dutch line, you have Hampstead, and then you don't see another thing. I think there's one library is still there, but it's just a store. So major depots like this, Union Bridge, ours, and then once you get up top of the mountain, guess what?
I just wanted to let you know that the train station is now owned by an LLC comprised of 43 members of the community. The community got together in 1990 and 1999 and bought the station from the owner of the time. So,
The Glendon station?
yes.
Oh, good, thank you. That's good information. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Because I can't imagine it sitting vacant for that amount of time. But like I said, they're so rare in Western Maryland now that, you know, except for the big ones like Hagerstown and Cumberland. Next slide, please. Whoops. Yeah, I mean, what else can you say? It looked like it just stopped and flopped over because it just laid off its wheels. No idea, and that would have never been something that the ICC would have ever been interested in. So there's no real reports on it. Next slide, please. Okay, August 1990, there she is. The railroad cars you see in the foreground, none of those railroads are in business anymore. They've all been absorbed by the larger railroads or just went out of business. Next. Okay, the Western Maryland's disappearance into everybody else. In 1927, the Baltimore and Ohio bought a 43% share of shares in the stock in the Western Maryland because the federal government had this grandiose idea that they were conglomerating all the East Coast railroads in the four systems. So the bigger railroads started gobbling up a lot of the smaller railroads. Although that never took place, obviously, and I'm sure that the railroads probably fought it something fierce. The B&O had a major stock in Western Maryland, which basically meant that they had controlling interest. No, you're competing railroads. You can't do that. So the ICC stepped in and they had to put their shares into I want to say receivership, but that's not it. It's Chase Manhattan Bank had it, but I can't think of the name of what it's supposed to be called. So, actually, the ICC granted B&O's request to control Western Maryland in 1968. The actual control didn't come until 1973. Next slide. Okay, then came the chassis system. The holding company, incorporated in 73, was comprised of the C&O, the B&O, the Western Maryland, and the C&O had acquired controlling interest of B&O back in 1962. So both of them put together, they end up controlling the Western Maryland, and the problem with that is the Western Maryland ended up getting everybody else's junk. So if you go up and look at some of our archives, there's some old C&O locomotives that were up in Hagerstown that look like they're ready to fall off the track. Next slide. as is the CSX. November 1st, 1980, Chessie System merged with Seaboard Coastline to become CSX Corporation. Bino and Sino were not legally merged out of existence until '87, when CSX successor, CSXT, that's the difference, was founded, burying Western Maryland deeper into oblivion. Dave, next slide. All right, who owns and operates former Western Maryland? Dave. CSXT has everything from Baltimore City up here to Emory Grove, all the way up here to Big Spring, Maryland, where it crosses over the river and connects with its own main line over into Cherry Run, West Virginia. And they own the line from Hagerstown to Lurgan, or basically Shippensburg. They're getting all the exchange out of York into Porter Springs, and they're getting everything that they need to bring into Hagerstown and up that way. It's it's sad. Anyway, next one. Next slide. Maryland Midland. Sure, if you've been standing down here over by the bridge, you've seen them. Glendon, Emory Grove, all the way up to Blue Ridge Summit to Highfield. Next slide, Dave. They're a Class 3 short line railroad, operated about 63 miles of track, including the Western Maryland Railway, from Emory Grove to Glendon to Highfield, which it purchased from CSX. Dave? Operations began in 1980 from 2010 to Walkersville. The Emory Grove Glendon Highfield line was purchased in '83, and the operations began. The railroad has been 87.4% owned by Genesee and Wyoming. Genesee and Wyoming is a New York State-based railroad. It's just been recently sold to some large conglomerate. But they are a large holding of short line railroads throughout the country, and they've got some foreign railroads too, particularly in Australia. And they bought the Maryland Midland, saying it was pretty profitable, so I would imagine they had to. Lehigh Cement is the largest shipper on the line and retains 12.6% interest in the ownership of the Maryland Midland. The hopper cars that you see down here sitting on the sidings are all out of Lehigh Cement and Union Bridge. They don't ship as many east this way as they do west. And west, every other day, they're shipping 60 to 70 cars west of cement. So they're doing all right. Next slide.
Wow.
That's it. That is the Western Maryland's, the CSX's so-called heritage unit. And you know what? It's something. They acknowledge that they do have a history. They normally don't care. And they're not going to do what the Norfolk Southern did and paint their locomotives the beautiful colors that the older railroads had. They're just not going to do it. So to see that, and when I looked at it today, it's out in California. You'll never see it running on this line. It's just too big a locomotive. Next. Okay. And that's it. Now, what I want to do is I want to pull this thumb drive out, and I have another drive in here that shows track charts, and especially Emory Grove and Glendon. And it shows the camp here and the actual trail that went down to where the shelter was. Here along the it's only like about 3 slides. Can we do that? We can try. Next. Oh, that sounds fun.
While Paul's getting his next couple of slides up, if I may talk to you for 30 seconds. We'd have to go back too many slides to pull this up. But Paul showed a photograph of the first Glendon station, which was made out of stone and had a tile roof. And if you were paying very careful attention, the level of the tracks, the double track, and the level of the foundation of the station were virtually the same. In a few slides later, and if you're familiar with Glendon, you'll notice that the new station, which was built after the first one burned down, the foundation of that station was at the same elevation, but the tracks are now 15 feet below that elevation. A tremendous program was undertaken by the railroad to lower the grade through Glendon. Now, why was that done? In the first slide, where the track elevation is up level with the station, there was a grade crossing with Butler Road, the double track, right where the bridge is now in Glendon, which led to a number of horrific automobile accidents with automobiles running into the sides of the front end of a locomotive, and that didn't fare very well. So by the request of the county and a lot of pressure, the railroad was requested to lower its main line right here in Glendon to pass underneath Butler Road. Now, Butler Road still has to arch over top to gain some elevation, but just imagine what it took to lower the elevation of a railroad roughly from, well, the Owings Mills. You can't just drop track down in the ground because you created immense grades that the trains can never surmount. So the elevation had to be lowered for miles on either side of Emory Grove to make that ditch that we're accustomed to, where the track runs through now, possible. It was just incredible. And imagine the disruption to the service of the railroad at that time.
What trains are running through now about here?
Okay. There are trains on this line 5 days a week. There is the train, there's a Maryland Midland train and a CSX train. Both of them are what are called turns. They run into a certain point and then come back the same route. Monday through Friday, there's a tremendous quarry up in Hanover, Pennsylvania, just outside of Hanover, Pennsylvania, that mines limestone. There's what's called the stone train, or the rock runner, that comes through Glendon every day at roughly 2 o'clock in the morning. It's loaded with limestone, goes through Emory Grove and into Baltimore City, and the limestone is very much pulverized. It's almost a powder, and it's used by a number of asphalt paving plants in Baltimore City to make asphalt, the aggregate in asphalt. That train goes into Baltimore roughly 2 a.m. every morning, and then comes back through Glendon, back to Hanover, empty, at roughly 1 o'clock or noon every day, Monday through Friday. Then there is a Maryland Midland train that comes from Western Maryland, effectively from Thurmont, where the Lehigh cement plant is.
Union Bridge.
Union Bridge, thank you. Into Emory Grove on Tuesdays and Thursdays, if the schedule hasn't changed. They bring loaded cement cars into Emory Grove. Again, if the trees weren't here, we could see loaded cement cars sitting over here in Glendon. And those cars wait until CSX then runs their train out from Baltimore to interchange, in other words, to pick up the cars that Maryland Midland has brought to Glendon. They couple onto those loaded cars and take them into Baltimore, into Curtis Bay. And then roughly twice a week, the empty cars come back out to Glendon, and then Maryland Midland, at their pleasure, stops by on a Tuesday or Thursday and takes the empty cars back out to Union Bridge. So I haven't done the math, but from Monday to Friday, we get 10 plus roughly 14 to 15 trains a week. Back when I was a kid, and I get a little choked up about this, excuse me, but oh boy.
I have pictures of him when he was a kid.
Yeah. The number of trains that ran through here was incredible. Just incredible.
What Dave has told you is correct. There is nothing, no railroad customers whatsoever between here and Baltimore City. When Maryland Cup shut down and moved out, that took a lot of cars out of the railroad itself. From here to Hanover, or what you get to Porter's is where the York branch goes off. The only thing is suburban propane up here in pouring. That's it. They were talking about running a siding at one time into the Solo Cup plant, but that never phased out up there in Hampstead. So that's it. And what they've described here, that's it. We have yet to figure out why CSX is so interested in the line from Baltimore to Hanover. And, you know, because it's just, that stone train must be so lucrative.
It is.
You know, it's the only reason why they keep it. So anyway, what we're looking at here, and I promised to show you this earlier. Again, this is, I forgot the date. Anyway, you can see, here's your trail. This is where the shelter was. And there's your trail going up to, there you guys are there. So, now, if I can get this done correctly. Come down a little bit. I'm so used to mouses. Right there. Remember I was talking to you about the Y? Well, this is basically the property plat. And again, your Glendon Meadows is right here. But at that time, it was almost right across from the train order office. And that's where they turned the steam locomotives. But once they didn't need to turn steam locomotives because diesels can go backward or forward, same speed, no matter what. So they didn't need to turn them around. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Questions, comments, concerns?